Perhaps some of your favorite characters of all time are people like Guts or Spike Spiegel, and maybe you feel drawn to any of these characters who've had some sort of existential crisis, some people who've looked into the abyss, so to speak, seen the truth about the world, but nonetheless have persisted and made it beautiful. If you have, then you're something like me, because for years these people embodied my ideal aesthetics. I always thought that they were wonderfully tragic, and these people were not only an aesthetic peak, they were not only very cool, to me they reflected something true about the world. It was not only that they were nice to look at, they weren't just superheroes who knew that some things were good and bad. They were complex people, dealing with the realities of the world as it is, dealing with the suffering of the world which was evident and inescapable, and nonetheless persisting through it all and making it something splendid. I identified with these characters. I loved them. And what I didn't realize is that through a certain way of engaging with this art, I was hiding something from myself, burying a seed within my soul that kept me very unhappy for many years. And the whole reason I wanted to make this video is because this operated at an unconscious level. It was something which I wasn't privy to for over 2 decades, really. But then once I saw it and managed to work through it, I became happier than I had been in years, and that's what I wanted to talk about today. I want to talk about this hidden thing that was keeping me unhappy. Simply put, what had happened was that I'd created a world for myself wherein all of my most ideal aesthetics had a tragic yet beautiful element to them. And this created a worldview which reflected what I really thought at the time, which was that life is inescapable suffering and the best we can do is love it regardless, is say yes through all the pain. In 1,000 subtle ways, this perspective jabbed at me and kept me unhappy. So let's get into why this was the case, and then how I managed to integrate this better and work through it. And I'm thankful to say that doing this did not actually reduce any of the beauty that I experienced in these artworks or in my life. It only altered a subtle aspect of my point of view, which has allowed me to have my cake and eat it too. I get to appreciate the depths of beauty of these characters whilst remaining happy in my personal life as well. I can remember the exact moment this realization hit me. It happened earlier this year, actually. I was doing an exercise, which I've done all throughout my life, really, my adult life at least. I was envisioning my ideal life. It's a simple self-help exercise, you would have seen it before. Essentially, all I was doing was thinking about my career, my romantic relationships, friendships, etc., and prompting myself to imagine what is the most ideal possible life I could have here. And I'm doing this exercise, and I come to the same kind of vision that I come to all those previous times. The person I saw as I visualized was somebody tragic but beautiful. When I thought about my work, I was doing incredibly meaningful work, incredibly important work, but there was an element of sacrifice to it. Maybe I was a little bit tired because I've been working so hard. When I think of my romantic relationships, I was seeing myself with a partner who I deeply loved with all my heart, and we're looking out at our kids playing. And as I'm looking out at my kids, I'm seeing them with world-weary eyes that have seen it all, and yet, in spite of it, said yes, yes, this grand adventure. In short, every vision I had for myself was tragic but beautiful. And for some reason, in this particular session, I was extra curious. I just kept investigating, asking more and more about these visions. And then this drum sounded throughout my soul. I realized that, isn't it kind of messed up that even in my most optimistic, my most ambitious visions for myself, I'm still not happy? I saw then, in an instant, that I was limiting my own imagination, and that at some deep level, I had imbibed the belief that I could not simply be a happy person, that to be a simply happy person was to neglect some fundamental truth of our universe. I saw happiness like some Garden of Eden. Once you had really been through something significant, you were kicked out of that place and you could never be there again. And thus, the best that you can do in this life is to be tragic but beautiful, to see the pain and love it regardless. But I've come to believe that this is a limitation of imagination, and an understandable one at that. I think that if you've been through something significantly painful, then it's only natural that you begin to believe that life is suffering. But there are other ways of going about it. Unbeknownst to myself, by believing so deeply in this tragic yet beautiful essence of life, I create a world for myself where I was essentially aiming at unhappiness, where I was striving to be a person who was noble, sure, but unhappy still. And realizing that this vision that I had of maturity, I thought that maturity was leaving this happy Garden of Eden and entering a world where you accept the suffering that is life. Realizing that this was just a belief, that this was a projection onto the world, would go on to genuinely reconstruct every area of my life, from the way I thought about work, to my friendships, to my romantic relationships. And if any of this has resonated at all with you, I wanted to share what exactly happened. Hopefully it can give you some insight into this path upcoming, because although the awareness was worth a lot, all of the real work came after. Now, I'm going to share some specific exercises that helped me, as well as resources which were invaluable for me along this path. And the first thing that I want to note is that the entire way that I'm approaching this, and what was vital for my own self-understanding, is that what we're doing is fundamentally about awareness and compassion. See, I think we live in a culture of incessant fixing. There's a felt sense that, oh, I need to fix this thing, then I'll be okay. I just need to get better at managing X or Y emotion, then I'll be okay. And as it pertains to our traumas, which have created this belief in, the essential suffering of the world, there's almost a sense that you have to get over these things, that these things are creating dysfunctions in your life. And even if something is creating a view of the world which might not be serving you correctly, there's still some part of that that's serving you. You as a being are entirely functional. And in my opinion, the most important step in this path of getting better is showing yourself deep compassion and understanding. Understanding that perhaps these habits that you've developed, these ways of seeing the world, were protective. They were highly functional. You cannot berate yourself for being such a fool when really perhaps these mechanisms you've developed are the only thing that kept you sane for a period of your life. Now, it might not be appropriate for the rest of your life. If you are falling down a cliff, that is a great time to tense up and curl up like a ball because you need to survive those blows. But when you're hiking regularly, you don't want to be all tensed up in that ball state. So this is all to say that the first step is not to blame yourself at all, but rather to understand yourself. And additionally, I don't think you get anywhere by forcing yourself to let go of things, by forcing yourself into fixing. My experience at least, and perhaps this is only a personality type thing, is that all change has come like a natural flow. You create the conditions for certain things to occur, you create the conditions for certain things to be let go of, and then it sorts itself out. In your sleep, one day you just wake up and all of a sudden that issue that you had is basically gone. That's been my experience at least, and so all the lessons I share are going to be highly in line with that. With all of this said, let's move into the exercises. These come in 3 parts. First, we're going to speak about understanding. Second, we are going to speak about the idea of clean fuels and dirty fuels. And finally, we're going to speak about space. Everything starts from understanding. And the way that I'm going to advise you go about this is fostering understanding from a place of the absolute deepest pits of compassion. Perhaps compassion that you've never shown yourself. We're going to look into your past, but as you do this exercise, I want you to do it with the heart of somebody who is incessantly curious, incessantly caring. If you feel as though you don't have this level of regard for yourself, then practice having this level of regard for someone else. Almost think of yourself like a child afflicted by the world, and the eyes that you show this person are ones which are automatically loving, automatically caring. This step is invaluable before proceeding. Otherwise, you're going to create more karma, let's say. Here's the exercise. set aside a block of time, at least 45 minutes of uninterrupted time where you can write or perhaps walk and talk to yourself, any place where you have a continuous stream of thoughts. And look into the ways that you're organizing your life, look into your habits, look into these tragic aesthetics that you have if you're anything like me, and just keep asking yourself why. Ask yourself why this came up, and look into your past and allow whatever comes up to come up. Do so with complete honesty. Let every single thought exhaust itself. Do not censor. If something comes up which is a quote-unquote bad thought, like you think, oh, this happened, it made me so angry, I hate this person, let that be there. Afterwards, we're not gonna have to go out and actually hate this person, but you should let yourself hear everything you have to say completely. You go through and you experience whatever you feel as you need to experience. You let whatever needs to come up, exhaust that thought completely. And then you let go of that as well. And you just ask why again. And you just keep digging, you just keep allowing yourself to say everything you need to say. And then once that's been said, you don't let that become the truth. You simply say, oh, that was what was there. Okay, and why? What else? And although it seems infinitely recursive, it's not really. I find at some point in time, you get to certain hearts of the matter. And then you work through these as well, and it's like a loosening. And at a certain point in time, your session ends, maybe your timer goes off, you just run out of time this day, and then you just move on with your life and you continue living. Now, the point is to foster understanding. This doesn't have to happen all at once, and you can't force this to occur. So you may have to do this many times. But across time, getting into the habit of showing yourself deep interest, deep compassion, and deep curiosity is going to unshuckle and unshuck some of these deeply imbibed habits and thought patterns that you have. Now, to the point about understanding, a resource here that was invaluable to me was this book, Already Free by Bruce Tift, I believe. And in this text, he speaks about ways of framing what happened to you, which I think are fantastically wise. One thing that really unlocked stuff for me was he talked about how certain experiences that happened to you as a child lead to attitudes which you bring into your adult life, which seem dysfunctional, but as a child were completely understandable, were beyond understandable. For example, if you grew up in a household that was a little bit chaotic, a little bit hard to deal with, then as a child, you might take on the belief that the world is fundamentally a chaotic place. And that is actually a very wise belief to take on as a child because it's quite true, it's quite reflective of something honest. However, that can be an almost impossible idea for many children to take on. If you as a child come to believe that, let's say, your parents' anger is not actually due to you specifically, but it's just because, oh, they are people with flaws. It's an incredibly mature perspective. Realistically though, for many people, as a child, that belief is just too much to handle. And as well, when you are a kid, the belief that your parents are people with flaws, or that the world is dysfunctional and chaotic in certain ways, that can seem like life and death. Especially with regards to believing that your parents have flaws. I think that the actual belief that your parents are like perfect superheroes as a child is something which has a naturally adaptive quality to it. They are directly responsible for feeding you and keeping you safe. And so, instead of taking on the belief that your parents are just people with flaws, instead you might take on a different belief. You might come to believe that, oh, it's not something's wrong with the world, something's wrong with me. And for a long time, this gives you a sense of control and a sense of agency. But as you grow up, you might not need that anymore. The question shifts from what was most appropriate at that time to, is this an appropriate belief for the reality of my present situation? Now, this really unlocks something for me. And again, you have to recognize the degree of compassion and care that's within this sentiment. Not blaming at all the child you for taking on this belief, but coming to see them with the clear light of day and how much this was needed, how helpful this was. And That book by Bruce Tift is full of exercises like this, is full of framings like this, so I'd highly recommend it. As you come to more and more of an understanding about what happened to you, you're going to see how more and more aspects of your life might be built around structures that the foundations were laid in a place that perhaps was not the best. You were laying foundations for a worldview which you needed to have at the time, but around them you've built entire cities. It's like a house built on shaky foundations or something like that. As you unveil the roots from them, these things will naturally fall apart on their own. And as this happens, you are going to want to look towards the clean fuels in your life. When I say clean fuels here, I'm talking about a very simple concept. The idea is that in life there are clean fuels and there are dirty fuels. A clean fuel is something which is self-completing. It doesn't really leave a mark on you, it's pure in a way. Clean fuels are things like compassion, a love of beauty, joy, curiosity. You can think about the ways that you see kids playing as evidence of clean fuels. They're not doing it with any kind of accessory motive in mind. They're not looking at that butterfly because they think looking at butterflies is going to be important for their future career. They're just interested in the butterfly. It's self-completing. Dirty fuels, on the other hand, are things that leave a mark. They're things which are correct in light of a condition. So you can think of dirty fuels as things like neediness, duty, sadness, anxiety, any of these things where the action that they get you to undertake is in order to make something else feel okay. And if your life is like mine, what you'll come to find after you go through these phases of understanding is realizing just how much of your life is built around dirty fuels. For me personally, I found that essentially my entire life was based on being duty-bound and honorable and overcoming some sense of anxiety and whatnot. As you loosen these up, I think it's imperative that at the same time you begin cultivating clean fuels. The way that you do this, I think, is essentially to give yourself space and silence and reconnect to those things that you find authentically fun. A book that I'd recommend here is The Artist's Way by Julia Cameron. The spoiler alert for why I recommend this book is not because I think she has some mystical method. It's just that throughout this book, there are numerous exercises where she gets you and prompts you to imagine things that you might not have been allowing yourself to imagine before. Imagine what you'd do if no one was watching. Imagine dream lives for yourself. Take yourself out in an artist state. These are all just activities throughout the book. You could hypothetically do all of this without ever getting the book, but the whole point is to allow yourself to come to new ideas. Try and give yourself the space to naturally rediscover directions which inspire you without any neediness attached to them. At the beginning, this is probably going to feel very unfamiliar. It might even be something that feels somewhat impossible. It might be very, very hard. We have a friend joining us. It might be very, very hard to even know if you're doing it right. And that doubt is perfectly fine as well. It's okay to stab in the dark. You might miss the mark, you might not. It's perfectly okay either way. As long as you're showing yourself compassion and curiosity, those habits over time are going to start becoming your default. The final thing I'll mention is the importance of space. And here a text I would recommend is Awareness by Anthony DeMello. As you go through this process of undoing the roots, of recultivating clean fuels, your life is going to change a lot. And at times it can feel frustrating and confusing. At times you may be asked to show yourself degrees of care which you've never had to show yourself before, especially if you're still in a situation where you have to deal in your day-to-day life with people who perhaps are used to the you which is based on dirty fuels. Perhaps they expect you to be certain ways. This can be very shocking and disgruntling to the status quo. And so there's something vital here about giving yourself space and time and recognizing that this path now has changed. This path now is less so about dealing with stuff and forcefully exerting muscular will to make it all right away. It's not anxious in that way anymore. Now it's about understanding and allowing. And in order to do this, you have to give yourself space. It's simply a precondition. Movement and time are the most rudimentary forms of organization. It's through these forces that atoms jiggle themselves into the correct structures. And you are much like this as well, an amoeba in a cosmic petri dish. This is how change is going to happen, but you have to give yourself space and time. And if any of this has touched you at all, then good luck. Be kind to yourself. The journey is long, but man, for me, it was so valuable. When I say that it made me happier than I thought was possible, I'm being completely sincere. The sadness that I had was so deep within me that I can recall my Amma, my grandmother, saying of me when I was a child that, oh, that boy has sad eyes. This is how deep it ran. I thought it was an essential element of life. And to recognize that it was a belief that could ebb and flow and change, was incredibly liberating. Let's summarize. The hidden thing that kept me unhappy for many years was that I had imbibed the belief that life was fundamentally tragic and yet it was beautiful. I thought that certain characters, certain ways of viewing the world were aesthetic peaks, and because of this, these seeped so deeply into my worldview that they became the truth. I realized that they are not the truth per se, they were simply adaptations to the way in which I was raised that were so deep-seated that they seemed like the truth. In order to move through these and become far more functional, let's say, the first step was to come to awareness from a place of deep compassion, curiosity about the self and what happened, and understanding how so much of these so-called dysfunctional patterns were not really dysfunctional at all. They were just protective. Second to here came the cultivation of clean fuels, which is the activity of finding things that you authentically connect with and slowly dislodging the motivation sources which are built on dirty fuels, things that leave a mark, things like duty or anxiety. And thirdly, as you go through this process, it's imperative to give yourself space. Things are going to change, and it is time and movement which organize all things, and you are part of all things, so you should give yourself the space. Thank you very much for watching.